The slope at Stony Fork Creek in the North Carolina mountains is a place where pristine beauty borders on deadly danger. This is not a hiking trail. It's a nearly vertical wall of rock, dirt, and slippery roots hidden under the dense canopy of the Pisgah National Forest. The terrain here is so steep and rocky that even experienced searchers accustomed to mountainous conditions get injured trying to stay on their feet among the slippery foliage and scree. The air here is dense. The silence is broken only by the noise of the stream below and the cries of birds. And yet, it was here, at this inaccessible height, where even animals rarely enter, that two deer hunters discovered human remains. This was no random walk or picnic spot. The very geography of this site screamed that man was not meant to be here, much less stay here forever. Mountains can keep their secrets, but this discovery defied the very logic of survival and common sense. The find belonged to Judy Smith, a 50-year-old nurse who had disappeared from a comfortable hotel in Philadelphia, 970 kilometers away from this wilderness point. 970 kilometers of silence that left no trace. But the main mystery did not even lie in this monstrous distance. The problem was the climb itself. The forensic examination confirmed what her loved ones knew. Judy had severe chronic arthritis in her knees. It was a condition that made every step an ordeal. She could barely walk on the flat metropolitan asphalt, but somehow she managed to make that grueling, almost mountaineering climb up the mountain. Who or what made her overcome the unbearable pain and climb to the place where death awaited her? This story began not in the backwoods, but in the sterile cleanliness of Boston's Logan Airport, 5 months before the grisly discovery. On the 9th of April in 1997, Judy and her husband, successful Boston attorney Jeffrey Smith, were preparing for their first trip together since their marriage. They had been in a relationship for about 10 years, but had made the marriage official only 8 months earlier. Their destination was Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, where Jeffrey was scheduled to speak at a prestigious pharmaceutical conference. It was a rare opportunity for the couple to break out of routine, to combine his work with her interest in history. Judy, a nurse by profession, was an avid traveler and had long wanted to see America's historic shrines. Neither of them could have predicted that this trip would become a point of no return. However, the carefully planned itinerary faltered before the plane took off. At the airline's check-in desk, it turned out that Judy had forgotten her driver's license in the morning rush. In 1997, following recent changes in Federal Aviation Administration regulations, this document had become mandatory for proof of identity when boarding a flight. Jeffrey, bound by a tight conference schedule and commitments to the organizers, could not wait. He was forced to fly alone, leaving his wife to deal with the problem. Judy had to return home to get her documents and board a later flight. At that moment, fate separated them not only by distance, but also by time. A fateful window of uncertainty had formed. Later investigators, who probed the case with an obsession worthy of the best detective, called the incident bizarre. Judy Smith was not a distracted or inexperienced tourist. She was a 50-year-old woman, organized and frighteningly independent. Her medical career demanded precision and attention to detail. She had extensive travel experience, having traveled alone to Thailand and backpacked through Europe, where navigation and logistics were far more complicated. Forgetting a key document on a simple domestic trip was completely uncharacteristic of her. This mistake, accidental or deliberate, created a blind spot of hours. Hours in which Judy was alone in Boston, out of her husband's sight. Enough time to make a call that no one should have heard, or to take cash out of a safety deposit box that wasn't traceable. The incident also shed light on the dynamics of their relationship, a detail that would later become key. Judy's friend, Carolyn Dickey, would later make a shocking statement on air that would become the linchpin of one of the theories. She claimed that Jeffrey and Judy's marriage was very fragile at the time of her disappearance. This statement dramatically changes the narrative. It turns the mistake with the certificate from an oversight into an opportunity, and the trip to Philadelphia from a romantic holiday into a cover for escape. It gives Judy a motive for a future 970-kilometer jump. She could use her husband's conference as the perfect alibi to disappear and meet someone elsewhere. But at that moment, Jeffrey, already in Philadelphia, was waiting for his wife, unaware of such depths. Judy arrived in Philadelphia on the evening of the 9th of April. She reunited with her husband in the lobby of the DoubleTree Hotel, and it seemed that the morning's incident at the airport was completely over. As an apology for her oversight and the long wait, she brought Jeffrey flowers. That gesture, that small detail, would later become critical. The initial suspicions of the Philadelphia police, faced with the lack of evidence, were so strong that they questioned whether Judy had even made it to the city. However, her arrival and the very act of handing over the flowers were corroborated by at least two independent witnesses, a hotel employee and another conference attendee who saw them in the lobby. This testimony proved irrefutably that Judy Smith was in Philadelphia. The mystery begins here, within the walls of this hotel. The morning of the 10th of April in 1997 began mundanely, almost sterilely. Jeffrey Smith woke before his wife to eat breakfast in his room and prepare for his first session at the conference. The last time he had seen Judy, she was in the shower and getting ready to leave. Their plan for the day was simple and straightforward, like thousands of other tourists visiting the city. While Jeffrey would be busy with work, Judy, like any history buff, would go sightseeing. On her list were Independence Hall and the famous Liberty Bell, symbols of American nationhood. In the evening, they agreed to meet at a cocktail party at the hotel to spend the rest of the day together. The atmosphere was relaxed and the weather was conducive to walking. When Judy left the hotel room that morning, she reportedly took her signature red backpack with her. It wasn't just a wardrobe item. Judy almost never carried a regular woman's handbag, preferring this handy and roomy backpack. It was her constant companion on all her trips, part of her image as an independent traveler. The witnesses who saw her that day and her husband remembered it. That red rucksack would become one of the central silent witnesses in the case. It would disappear with her, and its absence at the scene where the body was found would become as important evidence as those that would be found. But that morning, nothing portended trouble. The city had a life of its own, and Judy Smith simply went out into the street to disappear into the crowd. Philadelphia in April is a bustling metropolis. Thousands of tourists with cameras, business people in suits, street vendors, and the constant noise of traffic. It's the perfect environment to get lost, but also the perfect environment to leave a digital or paper trail. CCTV cameras on banks, credit card receipts, witnesses in cafes and souvenir shops. Judy Smith, a confident 50-year-old English-speaking woman, was not supposed to just disappear without a single transaction. She wasn't in a wild forest or on an alien planet. She was in the center of one of America's largest cities, a few blocks from historic monuments visited by millions. The illusion of safety was absolute, but it was that illusion that would become the worst trap of all. The moment the hotel door closed behind her, the countdown began. The 10th of April in the year 1997 was approaching evening. Jeffrey Smith, having finished his business at the conference, returned to his DoubleTree hotel room. He expected to find his wife, perhaps tired after a long walk through the historic center, but ready to share her impressions. Instead, he was met with silence. The room was empty. In that first moment, there was no alarm yet, only a slight perplexity. Perhaps she had lingered in the gift shop or decided to grab a coffee. He checked his watch. The time was nearing the start of the cocktail party they had agreed to meet at. Jeffrey went down to the banquet hall, expecting to see her there. But Judy was not among the dozens of guests and colleagues. He walked around the lobby, checked the bar. It was empty. His first real worry turned to anxiety when he returned to the room again. All her things she hadn't taken on the walk were there. The suitcase, the makeup, the book she'd been reading. But Judy herself was gone. The phone was silent. He started calling hotel services, then the local hospitals, but no one could give him any information. The illusion of security, so solid even in the morning, had crumbled in a matter of hours. Judy's absence from a scheduled meeting was the trigger that turned an ordinary tourist trip into an emergency. As the hands of the clock ticked past late evening, Jeffrey Smith dialed the number of the Philadelphia police, and with that call began the first phase of a search that would very quickly become bogged down in chaos and contradictions. The police officers who arrived at the hotel at first regarded the situation with guarded skepticism. An adult had been missing for only a few hours. In a metropolis like Philadelphia, that most often meant a trivial quarrel or a loss of sense of time. They interviewed Jeffrey, wrote down Judy's description. 50-year-old white woman, medium height, brown hair, a special note, her signature, red rucksack. But as the night passed and Judy never showed up, the case began to take on a more sinister tone. The morning shift of detectives who had taken over the investigation already realized this wasn't just a lost hiker. This was an unexplained disappearance from the heart of the city that required the immediate deployment of a full-fledged search operation. The search operation in Philadelphia began with a methodical review of standard protocols. Detectives requested the hotel's surveillance tapes, but they yielded nothing of substance. They had seen Judy enter the hotel the day before, but her departure on the morning of the 10th of April did not appear on any footage. Police began combing the neighborhood, interviewing taxi drivers, cafe workers, historic preservationists. And this is where the investigation encountered the first and foremost obstacle that turned the search into a surreal nightmare. A problem that would later be dubbed narrative fog, or the doppelganger phenomenon. Instead of finding traces of Judy, rescuers and detectives encountered ghosts. In the same area of Philadelphia where Judy was sought, there was at least one, and possibly two, women strikingly similar to her. This confusion made it almost impossible to separate reliable evidence from false traces. The first to fall into this trap was Judy's son, Craig, who rushed to Philadelphia in search of his mother. He was combing the streets with the police when, from afar, he spotted a woman whose gait and silhouette made his heart stop. He was sure it was her. As he got closer, however, he realized with horror and disappointment that it was a homeless woman, disoriented and unrelated to his family. This incident not only drained the family's emotional resources, but also diverted the search team's valuable time. But that wasn't the only double. A private investigator hired by the Smith family for a parallel investigation reported another sighting. He spotted a well-dressed white woman who matched Judy's description outside a grocery shop in the early morning hours. She appeared confused, but was not in distress. The detective tried to talk to her, but she quickly walked away. Was it Judy? Or another mirage? Any reports of Judy Smith being seen in Philadelphia in a disoriented state almost certainly referred to these false targets. The police were stumped. They were looking for a needle in a haystack, but that haystack was filled with dozens of similar needles, and each one led nowhere. This chaos of evidence was the first unexplained contradiction. Judy was an experienced, independent person. Had she been lost or in trouble, her behavior would probably have been different. But instead of clear signs of kidnapping or accident, the searchers got only fog. Not a single ransom call. No witnesses who saw her struggle or her being put into a car. Her red backpack, such a prominent detail, seems to have vanished with her. The search in Philadelphia didn't just hit a dead end, they hit a wall of absurdity, where the very image of the woman they were looking for began to double and blur, as if the city was deliberately hiding her, giving detectives false reflections. While ground teams tried to cut through the fog of doppelgangers, another team of detectives worked on Judy's digital and financial trail. And the results of that work caused a second wave of shock. The result was zero, an absolute, sterile void. Judy Smith left the hotel as if she'd stepped into another dimension. None of her credit cards had been used. Not a single ATM withdrawal. Not a single car hire agreement had been made in her name. Not a single plane, train, or bus ticket was purchased. In an era when financial transactions were already becoming the digital shadow of the individual, Judy Smith was a digital ghost. This discovery threw the family and investigators into a daze. This behavior was unlike any of the standard theories. It was not like a stranded tourist desperately trying to contact someone or pay with a card. It didn't look like a robbery as her bills were left untouched. She had left about $500 in cash in the hotel room, but appeared to have taken about $200 more with her. That money, if she had it, had also not surfaced anywhere. This proved one of two things. Either Judy was immediately kidnapped and isolated from the outside world, or she was traveling voluntarily, using only cash and possibly in the company of someone who provided transport and logistics. The shock of this discovery was compounded by an inevitable twist in any investigation of this nature. The Philadelphia police began looking at her husband. Jeffrey Smith, been the last person to see her alive, was automatically under suspicion. Although he had spoken at the conference, his alibi was being scrutinized. Detectives asked him uncomfortable questions, and this created additional tension. The family, instead of uniting in the face of tragedy, was pressured by law enforcement. This toxic atmosphere of suspicion further complicated an already hopeless search. The hope of finding Judy alive in Philadelphia melted away with each passing day, turning into an agonizing expectation of the worst. Days passed, then weeks, and there was no word from Judy Smith. The search operation in Philadelphia was officially called off. Detectives had exhausted all leads. The narrative fog had dissipated, leaving behind nothing but a cold void. For the Smith family, the most agonizing period had arrived: uncertainty. They returned to Boston, to a home where everything reminded them of Judy, but there was no clarity about her fate. Son Craig described the state as a constant nightmare in which you don't know whether to grieve or hope. Judy Smith's case became a hang-up, one of many unsolved missing persons cases. Hope, if there was any, was buried under the weight of 5 months of silence. The summer of 1997 passed in this agonizing vacuum. And then, on the 7th of September, came the call that changed everything. The call didn't come from Philadelphia or Boston. It came from the sheriff's office in Buncombe County, North Carolina, 970 kilometers from the hotel where Judy had last been seen. On the other end of the wire, they reported that 2 men illegally hunting deer in the Pisgah National Forest had stumbled across skeletonized human remains. It was the threshold of irreversibility. The call instantly shifted the focus of the investigation. Search tactics no longer mattered. It was now a job for coroners and forensics. The operational loss was total. Not only could they not find her alive, they were looking for her in the completely wrong place. The whole operation in Philadelphia, all that chaos with the doppelgangers, turned out to be a tragic farce. A distraction while the real tragedy unfolded hundreds of miles to the south. The remains were found in a wild, mountainous area. The big question now was not, where is Judy, but how the hell did she get there? The call from North Carolina became an operational earthquake. An investigation that had been smoldering for 5 months in the archives of Philadelphia instantly moved 970 kilometers south into the jurisdiction of the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office. The new task required immediate adaptation. This was no longer a search operation, but a highly complex forensic mission to recover remains from a hostile environment. The site indicated by the hunters was not by the roadside or on a hiking trail. It was located on a steep, almost sheer slope near Stony Fork Creek, a 20-minute, arduous hike from the nearest access point. The terrain was so treacherous that the first group sent to the site encountered physical resistance from nature. The team, made up of detectives and forensic experts, had to improvise, using climbing equipment to ensure safety. They literally clung to tree roots and slippery rocks to climb to the point where the remains lay. The atmosphere was oppressive. Detective Sam Constance, the lead investigator on the case, later recalled that every step was a risk. The danger was so real that one of the investigators, surveying the scene, slipped and suffered a serious sciatic nerve injury that required immediate hospitalization and subsequent surgery. This incident was not just an unfortunate accident, but a key, blood-chilling piece of evidence. If a trained police officer suffered a service-incompatible injury here, how did a 50-year-old woman with severe arthritis in her knee get here? This fact immediately changed the tactics of the investigation. Detective Constance, having soberly assessed the situation, used this fact to cut off the versions. He ruled out Jeffrey Smith, Judy's husband, as the physical perpetrator of the crime. Jeffrey was described as an obese man, suffering from obesity, and the investigators came to the unequivocal conclusion that he was physically incapable of not only carrying the body, but of getting to the location himself. It also made it unlikely that Judy had been killed elsewhere and brought here. It was more likely that she herself, either voluntarily or under duress, had made the agonizing ascent and been killed there. This paradox begged the agonizing question: what was the force that made her climb this mountain? The crime scene was a chaotic scene. 5 months of exposure to the elements and wildlife had done their work. Judy Smith's remains were skeletonized and scattered across the slope. Forensic investigators had to literally sift through soil and foliage within a few meters to gather evidence. It was painstaking, grueling work under the harshest of conditions. Every bone fragment, every scrap of tissue was carefully packed. The identification was quick. Dental records and the distinctive arthritis marks on the knee joints left no doubt that this was the missing nurse from Boston. But once the identity was confirmed, the question of cause of death arose. Even on the skeletonized remains, forensic experts found clear and undeniable signs of violence. It wasn't an accident. It was a brutal murder. Similar cutting marks were found on the ribs, indicating that the assailant had used a knife. But the most gruesome discovery was made on the remains of her clothing. The bra she was wearing had multiple cuts and punctures, indicating a violent, repeated attack. Judy Smith wasn't just murdered, she was tortured. The Pisgah forest became her execution site. Other items found on the slope were collected along with the remains. They were lying there as if they had either been thrown in a hurry or left behind deliberately. Next to the body was a pair of expensive sunglasses. A blue and black backpack, obviously not the red one she left the hotel in Philadelphia with, was found a little further away. Forensics also picked up a paperback detective novel. All of these items were foreign. They didn't fit Judy's image. They were props from someone else's life that were now part of her death. These findings turned the investigation from a simple murder case into a complex puzzle where each piece contradicted the previous one. The real psychological breakthrough, the moment when the case finally went into the realm of the unexplainable, occurred during the identification of the items. Judy's family, her husband and adult children, were presented with the items found at the crime scene. Their reaction came as a shock to the investigators, which shaped the entire further investigation. They did not identify anything. None of the items found on the slope belonged to Judy Smith. They were not her clothes. She was wearing heavy hiking boots, blue jeans, and thermal underwear. These were clothes meant for a serious hike in the mountains, not for sightseeing in Philadelphia. This anomaly was central. It proved intentional. No one buys a full set of expensive hiking clothes during an 8-hour tour of the Liberty Bell. These clothes were purchased after disappearing from the hotel, and specifically for the Pisgah forest hike. The disappearance from Philadelphia was only a prologue to the fatal encounter in North Carolina, for which she or her companion was preparing. For the family, it was an agonizing realization. The Judy they had known, the one who walked out of the hotel in city clothes, had nothing in common with the woman who had died on the mountain. And that wasn't all. The blue-black backpack was also unfamiliar to them. Her signature red backpack, her constant companion, had disappeared without a trace. It had been replaced by this one, a stranger's. And finally, the sunglasses. Expensive ball of sunglasses worth $110. The family confirmed they didn't belong to her. We see a clear, almost ritualistic theme of substitution. Judy's identity, her red backpack, her city clothes, has been erased and replaced with the killer's props. These items most likely belonged to her unknown companion, were either lent to her for the hike or simply abandoned at the scene of the crime. An investigation in North Carolina has hit a dead end. The killer left no trace. The clothes and glasses were bought with cash. And then investigators, desperate to find any clue in those 5 months of silence, began pulling up old, unsolved cases and reports of strange occurrences in the Asheville area for April and May. And they found something that sent a chill down my spine. It turned out that, while Philadelphia was looking for lookalikes and checking credit cards, something strange was happening in the Asheville area, in close proximity to where the body would eventually be found. Local investigators deemed the sightings credible. Shortly after Judy's disappearance in April, at least 2 witnesses in the Asheville area reported seeing a woman who matched her description. She didn't look like an abduction victim. She was driving a gray sedan. The origin of that vehicle remains one of the major mysteries of the case. Witnesses added another surreal detail. The gray sedan was full of boxes and bags. In one instance, a woman pulled up to a local campsite and asked the owner if she could sleep in her car on the property. Having been refused, she quietly drove off. This is not a portrait of a camper. It is a portrait of a man on the run, living on wheels. But the most important testimony came from Joanne Stucker, a clerk in the gift shop. Stucker recalled in detail a conversation with a woman she believed to be Judy. According to her, the woman was very alert and very pleasant, showing no signs of fear or disorientation. Moreover, the woman voluntarily entered the conversation, gave her own name, Judy, and told the same story Jeffrey had told the police in Philadelphia. She was from Boston, her lawyer husband was currently at a conference, and she just decided to go to the Asheville area. That testimony turned the whole case upside down. She was not a victim. She was in control and actively used the cover, her husband's conference, to explain her presence in North Carolina. It was these testimonies that gave the investigation a new, shocking point of reference. The final touch to this surreal portrait was added by the owner of a local grocery store. He reported that a woman who arrived in a gray sedan had made a very specific and unexplained purchase. She bought $30 worth of sandwiches and a toy truck. Judy's children were adults. Why would she need a toy? This detail seems almost fictional, Some have suggested it's a sign of psychosis, but a more plausible analysis focuses on both parts of the purchase. $30 for sandwiches and $97 is a provision for several people. Both the sandwiches, food, and the truck, symbolic gift, were for her unknown companion, probably a trucker. Evidence of a perky woman in a gray sedan buying a toy truck was the key to Detective Sam Constance's most plausible, but also most disturbing theory. Those footprints, however, were ghostly. They surfaced months later and led nowhere. The gray sedan was never found. The identity of the companion for whom the sandwiches and toy may have been intended remained a mystery. The investigation hit a wall again, but this time the wall was built of paradoxes. The most important of these was motive. Robbery had been completely ruled out. In the blue and black backpack found at the scene, forensics found $167 in cash. Her wedding ring was also in place. The calculations were staggering. Judy had taken about $200 with her, spent about $33 at the grocery store. The balance was in her backpack. The killer wasn't interested in money. The motive was personal. As the active phase of the investigation winded down and the case became covered in archival dust, it acquired three main theories, each of which attempted to explain what had happened, but were shattered by the facts. The first inescapable theory: the husband, Jeffrey Smith. He had a tenuous marriage motive, and the Philadelphia police never officially cleared him. But he had an alibi for the conference, and, more importantly, his physical condition made it impossible for him to climb that mountain. The second theory: a ghost from the woods. Authorities began to consider a connection to Gary Michael Hilton, the National Park serial killer who preyed on hikers in the same woods. The body of one of his victims was found in the same Pisgah forest. But the problem was timing. Hilton's famous series of murders began exactly 10 years after Judy's death. If it was him, Judy was his very first victim, after which he lay low for a decade. The operation to investigate the death of Judy Smith has officially ended, but it has not provided answers. The case remains unsolved because it is a perfect tapestry of inconsistencies. It is a story in which every fact contradicts another. How was an experienced, assertive nurse with severe arthritis able to climb a slope that traumatized a trained investigator? Why did her personal, branded belongings disappear, and in their place were left expensive foreign props? Hiking boots, bowler sunglasses, and a blue rucksack. And what did that strange grocery store purchase mean? The only theory that ties everything together is one that has never been proven. Judy Smith was not kidnapped. She voluntarily and secretly traveled to Asheville to meet someone she knew, someone she trusted enough to go camping in the wild mountains. And that someone killed her. We never found out who took her life, but perhaps the most important mystery is who Judy Smith really was in those last days in the gray sedan, 970 kilometers from her past life.